one is a tick box question. It said, what did the farmers do first? Tick 1. Okay, so let's have a look at the key words in our question, because that's what you should always do when you get a question. Underline the keywords or highlight the keywords, and that will help you to find the answers in the text. So what did the farmers do first? Well, we've got the word farmers. So we're looking at specifically the farmers and what they are doing. And then we've got the word first. Okay, so we're not looking at what they did second. We're not looking at what they did last. We're looking at what they did first. So the first thing, what they did at the very start of these options. So which one did they do first? And then it says tick 1. Now, am I going to tick 2 yet too? No, I'm not. If it says tick 1, we only tick 1. If we tick 2, we won't get the mark. Okay, so let's have a look at the part of the story where it tells us what the farmers were doing. So we're going to be focusing on the first little part of the chapter. So that evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill. 1 for Boggis, 1 for Bunce, and 1 for Bean. The tents surrounded Mr. Fox's hole, and the 3 farmers sat outside their tents eating their supper. Boggis had 3 boiled chickens smothered in dumplings. Bunce had 6 doughnuts filled with disgusting goose liver paste, and Bean had 2 gallons of cider. All 3 of them kept their guns beside them. Boggis picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" he shouted. "Lovely tender chicken. Why don't you come up and get it?" Okay, so he's trying to entice him. He's trying to get him out of the hole. Now, let's have a look at the first option. So the first option is eat supper. Now, where does it tell us that the farmers are eating supper? Can you see? It says, and the 3 farmers sat outside their tents eating their supper. So that's the part of the chapter where they are eating their supper. So we need to find out if the next 2 happen after that or before it. So the next one says they put up their tents. Now, let's read the first sentence, because I think that tells us, doesn't it? That evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill. So there we go. In the text, that is the part that tells us that the tents were put up. Okay, now we need to find shout to Mr. Fox. Okay, so put up the tent, they've had dinner. Let's carry on reading. Boggis picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" he shouted. Okay, so that's when he shouted. He shouted, "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" So we have looked for all 3 events that are mentioned in the question, and we've highlighted them in the story. Okay, so we know when each of them happened. Now, the question, remember, is asking us what they did first. So what is the first thing they did? What was the number 1 thing that they did? Now, which part have we highlighted first? Well, we've highlighted 3 tents were put up, okay, because that was the first thing that happened. Okay, so therefore, we need to put a tick. We need to put a tick in put up their tents. Okay, now I put a cross, but that's only because I don't know how to do a tick on the computer. But when you're answering the questions, make sure you put a tick, okay, because the question does ask to tick 1. So there we go. We have highlighted the different events that are mentioned in the question, and then from that we've been able to see which is the first one, and we put a tick, or a cross in my case, in the right box. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one together. What did Boggis do before he shouted, "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" Okay, now we've seen that somewhere, haven't we? Now, first of all, let's highlight the keywords in our question. So we're talking about Boggis here. Okay, we're not talking about Bunce or Bean. We're talking about what Boggis did. And we're talking about what Boggis did before, not after, but before he shouted, "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" So we are looking about Boggis, and before he said, "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" Well, let's have a look at this part of the story where we know it's in, because we remember reading it in our first question, don't we? Because we had to order this, because we had to order when he shouted down the hole. Okay, so let's have a look for this quote, for this part of speech in our story. So it says Boggis picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. Can you smell this, Mr. Fox? He shouted. So there we go. We can see, can you smell this, Mr. Fox? So we've used our question and found that quote in the text. Well, now we are talking about Boggis, and we are talking about what he did before. So we're not going to look after, are we? After the highlighted section, we're going to be looking before it. And we're going to be looking at what Boggis did. And can you see at the very start, it says Boggis. So there we go. This is going to tell us what Boggis did. And we know that this is what Boggis did before because it comes before what he said. And it says, picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. So there we go. We found the quote in the text and then we've looked before it to find what Boggis did before. So now it is your turn to write the answer to this question. And then once you've finished answering this question, you have some more questions to do with sequencing on your resource Year 2 reading 11th of February resource 2, okay? But don't forget also to go back to question 1 and fill that one out again, the question that we did together before this one. Okay, well, have a lovely rest of your day, Year 2, and I'll see you in our next reading lesson. Bye.